in this chapter about the layers. Let's go to the folder called Layers Part 1. Then let's open the PSD file Layers 1 by double-clicking. At the top on this tab, there is the name of the file, which is layers1.psd, and on the right, in the Layers panel, there are 3 layers: the ball, the shadow, and the background. So let's learn how to use the Layers panel. Firstly, let's see how to change the visibility of a layer. If I want to hide a layer, it's very simple. I can click on the eye icon right here to turn off the visibility of the layer. If I click again, I turn on the layer and the tennis ball is now visible. Sometimes the visibility is also useful to identify a layer. The shadow disappears, so I'm sure it is a good layer. Okay, another thing you need to know is to rename a layer. To do so, it's very simple, just double-click on the layer's name. I'm gonna type in tennis ball, for example. Hit enter to validate the name. That's a good practice to give the layers a name, especially to be more organized. Okay, let me show you another point. You also have the possibility to unlock a layer. As you can see, by default, when you open an image, this layer called background is locked. It means that if I take the Move tool, I can't move this layer. This is impossible, because the layer is locked. Now, if I want to unlock this layer, it's very simple. I can click directly on the padlock icon to unlock the layer. With the Move tool selected, I can click and drag to move the tennis court. Ctrl-Z or Command-Z on Mac to undo this action. If I want to lock again this layer, I click on this icon right here to lock the layer. Now, as you can see, the layer is locked. I can't move the layer anymore. If I try to erase the background, I can't do it because the background is protected. Okay, another thing that we can do is to delete a layer. If I want to delete the layer of the shadow, for example, I'm going to select the good layer. Then, at the bottom of the Layers panel, click on the trash icon right here. A new window pops up, click Yes, and the layer of the shadow is deleted. Let me Ctrl-Z or Command-Z on Mac. Another way to do so, which is quicker, is to hit the Delete key on your keyboard, and the layer is deleted. As simple as that. Let me go back, Ctrl-Z or Command-Z on Mac. And the last way to delete a layer is to right-click, then choose Delete Layer. The right-click on the layer is very important, because from this menu, you can access to a lot of very useful options. In this case, I choose Delete Layers, and it's done. Now let's see how to change the opacity. That's very important in Photoshop. If I select the layer of the shadow, for example, and I want to change the opacity, I can go right here. If I click and drag to the left or to the right, I can adjust the opacity. At 0%, the shadow is not visible. If I increase the opacity, the shadow is darker, more visible. So the opacity is linked to the transparency. If I decrease the opacity, the shadow is more transparent. It reveals the red color of the background, because the shadow is transparent. I'm going to choose a value about 50%, for example. This looks pretty nice. And lastly, let's see how to change the order of the layers. I click on a layer, then click and drag. There is a blue line at the top of the layer, which indicates the new position of the layer. If I release the click, the order of the layer changes. The shadows layer is now above the tennis ball. If I take the Move tool, I can move the shadow by clicking directly on it. And if I increase the opacity, you will see it better. The shadows layer is on top of the tennis ball's layer. You need to know the layers are like a stack of papers. The paper at the top is always visible, and the others, under the paper at the top, will be hidden. That's the same thing with the layers in Photoshop. The layer at the top is always visible. If I unlock the background, and I put the background at the top of all the layers, just like that, as you can see, all the layers below the background are hidden. I'm going to reorder the layer. I click and drag, then bring it at the bottom of the stack of the layers. And with the Move tool, I can adjust the position of the shadow. Then I decrease the opacity. To conclude this lesson, we saw how to turn off the visibility of a layer by clicking on the eye icon. how to rename a layer by double-clicking on the name of the layer, how to unlock or lock a layer by clicking on the padlock icon. The layer is protected. Then we saw how to delete a layer. Select the layer, then hit the delete key on your keyboard. Then we saw how to adjust the opacity of a layer. You can go right here and click and drag to the left or to the right. It's like transparency. And finally, we saw how to change the order of the layers by clicking and dragging a layer. Voilà, that's all for this lesson. In this chapter about layers, let's go to the second part. Then let's open the PSD file Layers 2. As you can see in the Layers panel, there are 3 layers: the ball, the shadow, and the background. So let's continue learning the layers options. If you want to move the layer, you can take the Move tool or hit the V keys at the shortcut. By default, with the Move tool, you can move an object by clicking directly on it. That's because this option is checked, Auto-Select. But in a few cases, you need to uncheck this option. If I click on the ball, the layer is automatically selected. If I click directly on the shadow, in the Layers panel, the layer of the shadow is selected. So I can move the shadows layer. That's very useful. I click on the ball, the layer is selected, I can move the ball, so make sure this option Auto-Select is checked. Now let me show you how to select multiple layers with the shadows layer selected. If I press down the Control key or Command on Mac, then I click on the layer of the ball, I selected both layers. It's like selecting files. So now if I click directly on the layer of the ball, the 2 layers move together. After that, I can click outside to deselect the layers. Now let me show you how to duplicate a layer. That's very important. For that, the easiest way is to select a layer, the ball's layer for example, then hit Ctrl+C or Command+C on Mac to copy all the pixels of the ball's layer, then hit Ctrl+V or Command+V on Mac to paste the pixels of the ball. It's as simple as that. As you can see, there is a new layer with the same name as the original. Now I can move the layer's copy, resize the layer with the Transform button. Click on the corner handle, hit Enter to validate. That's the easiest way to duplicate a layer. Just copy and paste the layer, it's intuitive. Another way to do so is to hit Ctrl+J or Command+J on Mac. The ball is copied in place above the original and there is a new layer, ball copy. Finally, the last method to do so is to right-click on the layer. Then you can choose Duplicate Layer. From here I can rename the layer, ball copy, hit OK, and it's done, there is a new copy of the ball. Actually, on the image, we can see only one ball, but in the Layers panel, you can see that the copy of the ball is on top of all the layers. Indeed, if I move the ball, we can see the original tennis ball, which is below the copy. It's like a stack of papers. We saw different techniques to duplicate the layers. Just keep the one you like best. Let's see another option. With the ball's layer selected, hold Ctrl or Command on Mac. If I click on the shadows layer, both layers are selected. If I right-click, I can choose Merge Layers. It remains only one layer with the ball and the shadow. If I move the layer, they move together. The downside of this method is I can't move the shadow separately from the ball. If I move the ball, the shadow moves. If I move the shadow, the ball moves. They are not separate. So you need to be sure that you won't move them anymore. Let me show you another problem. If I move up the shadow just underneath the ball, I select both layers with the Ctrl key, right-click, choose Merge Layers. Now it's impossible to move them separately. They are merged together and it's not reversible. Sometimes you can merge layers to simplify the organization of your layers, but be careful. Then another point is to link the layers together. Let me show you that. If I select the ball's layer, press down the Ctrl key to select both layers. Then at the bottom, I can click on the Link button right here to link the layers. Now there is a chain icon on both layers. I click outside to deselect the layers, and if I move the ball, the shadow is also moving. Both layers are linked together. It's very similar to a group. It can be useful when you have a lot of layers. If I want to unlink the layers, I can select one of the layers, then click on the link icon. Another solution is to right-click on the layer, then choose Unlink Layers. To link the layers, select both of them, right-click, then choose Link Layers. So you can right-click or you can go at the bottom and click on this button, Link Layers. That's also useful for buttons with text, for example. Finally, the last thing I want to show you is how to group the layers in order to organize your layers. When you have a lot of layers, it's a good practice to use groups. To create a group, it's very easy. If I want to group the ball and the shadow, I press down the Control key or Command on Mac to select both layers, right-click, then choose Group from Layers. Or I can go at the bottom and click on this button right here to group all the selected layers. So I can right-click, then choose Group from Layers. Give it a name, Ball plus Shadow, just like that. Hit Enter to validate. As you can see, the folder contains the two layers. It's more organized and easier to find a layer, to move a layer. If I click on the white arrow next to the folder, it reveals the two layers. But if I click directly on the ball, I can't move the two layers. If I want to move both of them, there are two solutions. I can link the layers with the link icon. So actually, there is a group and the layers are linked together. If I click on the ball, I can move both of the layers. Let me show you the other solution. At the top in the options bar, right here there are two modes for the auto select option. The layer option is activated by default. If I choose the group mode, if I click on the ball, I can move all the layers in the group together. But this time the layers are not linked. With this option for the move tool, I can move directly the group. So it's up to you. You can link the layers together, or you can choose this option with the move tool to move the group. You really need to know how to manage layers with Photoshop. Indeed, the Layers panel is the most important panel in Photoshop. Voilà, that's all for this lesson. In this chapter about the layers, let's go to the folder Blending Modes. Then let's open the photo of the Mount Fuji. I click and drag the photo to Photoshop, just like that. In this exercise, the goal is to play with the overlay of images. I'm going to add some images and I will play with the transparency. For that, I'm going to import a new image. Let's go to the folder called Overlays. I bring the photo of the moon to Photoshop by clicking and dragging the file, just like so. Then I scale down the image by clicking on its corner handle, adjust the size, click inside the frame to move the moon to the center of the image. Hit Enter to validate the importation. As you can see, there is a black background on the image. Now the trick is to change the blend mode of the layer. For that, let's go to the blend modes right here. By default, the blend mode is set to normal. And if I click, I can change it. As you can see, the blend modes are grouped together. There is a line of separation between them. So if I go to this group right here, the black pixels magically disappear. I'm going to choose this mode right here, linear dodge, which is nice. I will set the opacity to 0%. Then I increase slowly the opacity until the result is fine for me. Maybe like so, about 50%. That's okay for me. And it's done, as simple as that. Okay, let me show you another example. Let's go to the folder. Then I will choose the photo of the fog. Click and drag to import the image. Press down the Alt key or Option on Mac to resize the image from its center. Increase a little bit the size of the image. Hit Enter to validate. As you can see, this is a smart object because the image is imported. Let's change the blend mode from normal to another blend mode like lighten, color dodge, linear dodge. I'm going to choose the best blend mode. Screen mode looks pretty nice. Then I set the opacity to 0% and I increase slightly the value until 70%, which looks good. It was the same logic. I removed automatically the black pixels without detaching the image. It's quick and easy. Alright, let me show you another example. I'm going to click and drag the petals into Photoshop, just like that. Press down the Alt key or Option on Mac to resize the image from its center, increase slightly the size, release the click, hit Enter to validate. The image is imported. Now you get the idea. I'm going to change the blend mode of the layer from normal to another blend mode in this group right here. This time, this group of blend modes hides the white pixels. So let me choose the best blend mode, maybe this one, Color Burn. I like the luminosity and the contrast. Finally, I adjust the opacity and it's done. Finally, let's zoom out to see the entire image. To conclude, we saw the basic use of the blend modes. We will see another application later in the course. The blend modes are very important in Photoshop, so keep this option in mind. Voila, that's all for this lesson about the blend modes. in this chapter about the layers. Let's go to the folder called Layer Styles. Then let's open the photo of the living room by double-clicking on the file. As you can see, it is a PSD file. Indeed, in the Layers panel, there are 3 layers. The example poster, which is on the right, with some layer styles applied on it. It is this one, as you can see. The goal is to apply the same style on the left poster. For the styles, there is a gray shadow, a black outline for the frame, and the shadow is also applied inside of the frame. So let's create these styles for the left poster. Select the layer of the left poster. Now, to apply a style, I can go at the bottom of the Layers panel, right here on this effect icon, then click to choose a layer style. Let's apply a drop shadow style, for example, one of the most used style. Now a new window pops up. I can click on the white bar of the window to adjust its position. I need to see both the posters and the window in order to make the adjustments relatively to the example. As you can see, the light comes from the center from the French window. So right here, the shadow will be casted on the left. If I want to adjust the position of the shadow, I can click directly on the poster. I modify the distance and the angle, so I can adjust slightly the position of the shadow. Do you remember the light comes from the right, so the shadow will be casted on the left. As you can see, the effect is checked. It means the style is applied. Now in the right side, let's adjust the options to fine-tune the result. I can click on the black square to change the color of the shadow, but generally a shadow is black. You can decrease the opacity, that's very important for a shadow. As you can see in this corner of the wall, the shadow is a soft gray shadow, so I'm going to create this kind of shadow for the left poster by reducing the opacity a little bit to make the shadow subtle. I can also fine-tune the angle to adjust the direction of the light, which is from the French window on the right, but I prefer to click directly on the image to move the shadow. It's quick and easy. I can change both the angle and the distance. Alright? For the spread, usually I don't modify this option. Now the size option is very important for a shadow. If I increase the size, I can blur the edges of the shadow. Let me show you that. If I increase the size, it makes the shadow softer, and if I decrease the size, the edges of the shadow are sharp. It really depends on the lighting of the scene, so I need to adjust the shadow to make it realistic. So let's blur the edges of the shadow. I can increase the size, and it's done. The drop shadow looks pretty nice. Now let's apply a stroke style for the black frame. For that, I'm going to check the style to apply the style, then click on the gray bar to see the options of the style. So it's important to click on this bar right here in order to access to its options. From here, it's very simple. I can adjust the size of the stroke, but as you can see, the corners are rounded. So let's change the position of the stroke from outside to inside. Now it looks better with these angles. Then I'm going to reduce slightly the size of the outline. As you can see, the frame is black, so let's change the white color of the outline to a black color. I can decrease the opacity a little bit. Now it's a dark gray color. Okay. As you can see, there is a plus icon, which means I can add another stroke. So if I want, I can have multiple strokes. Same thing for the shadow. Now let's apply another style, which is inner shadow. Let's click on the checkbox to activate the style, then click on the name of the style to display its options. If I click on the black square, I can change the color of the shadow, like for the drop shadow. If I click directly on the poster, I can move the inner shadow, just like so. As you can see, when I move the inner shadow, the drop shadow of the poster of the right is also moving. That's because by default, Use Global Light is checked. If I uncheck this option, I can move separately the shadows. It's more flexible. Do you remember the light is coming from the French window? So the inner shadow could be something like that. I'm going to increase the opacity to make the inner shadow more visible, just like that. I can change the distance with the slider. I can click directly on the poster to change the distance and the angle. Okay. Maybe I can adjust the size of the inner shadow. I can either sharpen the edges or soften the edges. The goal is to make it realistic. In this case, I'm going to blur the edges, then validate with OK. Now, as you can see in the Layers panel, there is a FX icon, which means one style or more is applied. Indeed, there is a list of all the styles which are applied on this layer. I applied on it a stroke style, an inner shadow style, and a drop shadow style. If I click on the eye icon, I can hide the stroke. or the inner shadow, just like so. You can see it on the left poster. If I want to delete all the styles applied, I can right-click on the FX icon, then I choose Clear Layer Style. And it's done. All the styles applied are removed. If I want to copy and paste a style, it's possible. I can right-click on the FX icon, then choose Copy Layer Styles. Then I can apply it on the top layer, for example. I'm gonna right-click, then choose Paste Layer Styles. It's done. The styles are copied. But as you can see, the shadow is on the left. So I'm gonna double-click on the FX icon to edit the style. Then I go to the Drop Shadow option. I click on the name of the style to display its options. I move the window. Then I can click directly on the poster to move the shadow to the right side. Now it looks more realistic. I can validate with OK. Another solution is to double-click directly on the name of the layer style in order to access to its options of this specific style. This is faster. I can modify some options, then validate with OK. Double-click on the name of the style, change the style, and validate. As simple as that. So let me show you a last thing. If I want to detach the effects, I can right-click on the FX icon right here, then choose Create Layers. I validate with OK. As you can see, Photoshop created a new layer for each style. That's very useful. If I click on this eye icon, I can identify the layer, which is the stroke effect. On this layer, there is the inner shadow effect. Right here, there is the original poster without the styles. And lastly, there is the drop shadows layer. So now it's more flexible. I can choose the eraser tool, for example, to remove some pixels of the shadow, just like so. I can also erase the shadow at the bottom. So now the shadow is only on the top left. I can also transform the shadow, give it a perspective. It's much more flexible when the styles are detached. And finally, hit Enter to validate. To conclude, to apply a style on a layer, just click at the bottom of the Layers panel on the FX icon, then choose a style, drop shadow, inner shadow, stroke, for example. You can also try the other styles. When you apply a style, it's totally reversible. You can edit the style anytime you want. You can copy and paste a style to another layer. You can also detach the styles of a layer for more flexibility. Voilà, that's all for this lesson. In this chapter about the layers, let's open the mockups folder. Then I'm gonna open the PSD file called mockup. Just double-click to open it. As you can see, this PSD file contains a framed poster. With a mockup, I can replace automatically the actual design in the frame with my own design and with the same perspective. Let me show you that. In this PSD file, there are two folders. Let's go to the folder called Mockup Design. I open it by clicking on the white arrow, and the most important layer is this one. I stretch the panel. Its name is Replace Design Here. As you can see, there is a small icon, which means it's a smart object. As you know, a smart object can be transformed anytime you want without losing quality. That's one of its properties. Now, if I double-click directly on the thumbnail, a new file is opened with a .psb format. It's a transitional file, and this is where I can replace my image. So let's import the new image by going to the menu File, then choose Place Embedded. Then, in the Layers folder, I can import the photo of the Mount Fuji, just like that. I'm going to increase a little bit the size of the image from its center. I press down the Alt key, then click on the corner. As you can see, there is a new layer of the imported image. Now, don't forget to save the PSB file. Hit Ctrl S or Command S on Mac, and if I go back to the original file, the PSD file, that's where the magic happens. I don't need to transform the image, to distort the image. The design is automatically replaced. Just keep in mind that the smart object is kind of a container. The perspective of the container is still the same. This is a simple example on how the mockup works. There are a lot of mockups for mobile phone, for websites, for t-shirts, for shoes, for print designs, like logo designs. There are tons of mockups in the internet. Finally, let me show you one of the most famous websites for mockups, which is named FreePic. If I go to the menu Categories, I can access to the mockups section. From here, you will see a ton of mockups that you can download. So take the time to download them, to try them. You can easily replace the visuals with your own design. To conclude, mockups are easy to use and useful to show your designs in a specific context. Voilà, that's all for this lesson.